So, welcome back to the Hollywood Music Workshop podcast. I'm your host, Rolf Gustavson, and today I have the honor of interviewing Dave Metzger, who is a renowned arranger, orchestrator, producer, and composer, known especially for his work on Disney films and especially as the arranger for Frozen and Frozen 2, as well as for composing the score for Disney's most recent feature animation Wish, and also for composing the score for Disney's short Once Upon a Studio. They will be giving a wonderful 4-day class at the Hollywood Music Workshop called The Journey from Orchestration to Composition. And this is going to be in July, from July 13 until July 16 in Baden, Austria. Welcome, Dave, to the Hollywood Music Workshop podcast.
Great. Thank you, Rolf. So nice to be here with you today.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me. And so I thought, as a warm-up question, perhaps I'd like to ask if you've ever been to Europe, and especially have you been to Austria before?
I have been to Europe many times. I've been to London quite a few times, of course, for different reporting projects. But I've been pretty much. Uh, I've not been east of Germany, but I did get to Vienna once. I'd say it was probably about 15 years ago. I was there on a tour with my son, who was playing in an orchestra, and I went along as a chaperone, and it was a beautiful time, and I had a wonderful experience in the city and in the country, and I'm very much looking forward to being back.
Yeah. What instrument did he play?
He was a bass player. He followed my footsteps. I was actually a very bad bass player, but he was a good player. And sadly, he never didn't continue on. He played through college, but then went into a career in chemistry. And so I
Okay.
sort of lost the time to be able to practice and play in different groups.
But
But
certainly one can play again, if you
yeah.
just have the kind of skills, you can pick up the bass at any time and start bopping along.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my hope. And so he still has an electric bass, and he actually, it was always kind of fun. He played my old upright bass that I played when I was an active player, and so but I still have it here with me. He hasn't wrestled that away from me yet.
Okay. Well, that's wonderful. The bass is kind of the heart of the orchestra in many ways. So,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
thought I would be a bass player, but then, they gave me the guitar and they said I should probably play the guitar.
right.
But I always dream about playing the bass, so good that we have some bass friends here. Great.
Yeah.
And so I thought, just for you to present yourself to our audience and the people who are taking your class and listening in uh, later, could you just tell us a little about your background and if you've had any particular mentors along the way and what they've meant for you? Because the Hollywood Music Workshop is very much in the business of giving back. So I'm thinking about if you have any mentors that you had throughout your life and what they've meant to you. So that would be a question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful question. So I grew up in a very non-musical family. And so for me to kind of stumble on music was actually kind of just a complete accident. I never took, I took like 2 months of piano lessons when I was 6 years old, because every parent, has their kid take piano lessons. And I really revolted so much. I was more interested in playing sports at that point. And so after 2 months, my parents gave up, forcing me to go to the piano lessons, which I regret now, but also in some ways, I suppose it was not a bad thing for my career as far as being an orchestrator. I think differently than if I were a pianist, I suppose. But so I actually was had no awareness of music until I was going into the seventh grade. And I wanted to go into a wood shop class, into a shop class to do woodworking, but that class was full. And so the administrators, in just having to sort of like move the kids around, they put me in a choir class just randomly. And it turned out that choir director was a woman named Joyce Eilers, who was at that point one of the top choral composers in the United States for middle school, that kind of age group. And so I really didn't want to be in this choir class, but my parents said, "Oh, just try it out." And so I went, and within a few weeks, I realized that a lot of the music we were singing was music she had composed, and somehow I'm not even really sure that sparked something in me. And then at that first winter holiday, I went home and did a 4-part vocal choral arrangement of Barbara Ann, the old Jan and Dean Beach Boys song, and just completely from my head to paper because I didn't have any instrument ability to be able to play it out. So I was able to figure it out, and I showed it to her when classes started up again, and she saw something there and nurtured me and took me under her wing. And so I started writing music then pretty much nonstop at that point. So I was 12 years old, and and she was an incredible supporter of me. She everything that I would write, she would always take the time, class time, to read it down, at least. And then it got to the point of where then she would be scheduling my music at concerts. And this is when I was 13, 14 years old, so I was getting a lot of great feedback at that point. Being able to hear the stuff I was writing being performed back, and this is back in the 70s, so there were no computers, no samples or anything, right? So getting that oral feedback was invaluable. Then in high school, so in 10th grade, I switched over to the band program, and that's when I picked up the bass and started playing bass, because the band director there was a guy named Harvey Brooks, who was then my next mentor, who took over kind of where Miss Tyler's left off with me, and I started then writing a lot of jazz band charts and concert band material. And again, Mr. Brooks was great. He would always take the time to anything I would write. He would take time to at least read through in class time. And then, and again, by the time I was done with high school, much of the music we were performing was music I had composed or arranged. And so I got like a tremendous amount of youthful experience and wonderful support from two very important mentors to me in my very young life.
Yeah, and also imagine from a young age having your music always played or heard. You always heard what you played, and not only through computers like I grew up, but through real players. And I was
Right.
also thinking about because I have been in this business for a few years, and I just thought it's 10 years ago I wrote my first movie, and I had my first choir session in our garage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was 8 people or something like that, and
Right.
this just popped up in my head because it was around this time 10 years ago. But it's what a pleasure to
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
to
No,
have that opportunity at a very young age.
yeah, absolutely. And I was so fortunate, and certainly, technology, I'm a huge user and supporter of technology, and it's also like the genie is out of the bottle, right? So you can never go back. But that being said, there's nothing like if you're writing for real musicians, there's nothing like getting that feedback of having them, having it played and learning from that experience of what works for, a violin is going to be different than what works for a oboe or a flute, and so and how you write for them is quite different. And so getting that early experience and knowledge was really great. And and again, computers are great, and they're a great tool, and we have them. They're not going away, but there is a real wonderment and a real joy of knowing and hearing your music played by real musicians. And so I always really am encouraging of that for anybody to have that experience and that opportunity.
Absolutely, and also to remember that the notation software exists for music to be performed by other human beings. And
Absolutely. That's
that
exactly right.
empathetic point of view, that's something that can even often be forgotten, but should never be, because that empathetic understanding of how a part should look like, how a page of score should look like, and how that translates when somebody who has played the oboe for 30 years, they pick up the instrument, and what that informs to them and how they can speak their artistry and bring that in. So yes, I agree
Absolutely
100%.
true. Yeah, you said that so well. Yeah, yeah.
So, but so how did and when did then film music come into play? Because you said you had choir music at a young age, then you had jazz charts, and then I wonder how did you end up working on Disney movies and in so many other great movies, like How to Train Your
Yeah.
Dragon, for instance, for which I have the score here very close
Oh,
by
very nice.
always. I marked out. I know which you orchestrated, and they're
Oh,
my favorites, of
how
course.
nice.
So my question once again, how did movies come into play in your life? And
Yeah. Well, I had sort of two sort of concurrent things happened at about the same time. One is I took my first year of university music theory when I was in ninth grade. So like I was 15 years old. And at that point, I had the professor of that class set me up with scores in the music library at the university and records. Back then, they were albums, right? And he made a list of all the great, I mean, not all, but like 20 great classical music pieces. So I studied those and listened to them relentlessly. And that's why I learned orchestration essentially was I just studied the scores and listened to the record and followed the score. And whenever something caught my ear, I would stop the record and I would analyze what was going on, what made that sound. And so that's really how I learned orchestration. But the other thing that happened at that same time, I was 16 years old, is there was a movie that came out, Star Wars, the original Star Wars. You might have heard of it. I don't know. But so that dates me. That shows my age. But I was 16 when I saw that, and that was it for me. When I heard John Williams's music and saw it with interacting with the picture on the screen, it was like, okay, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to be a film composer. And of course, being 16 years old, I grew up in Oregon, which is a small state a long ways from Los Angeles, or it's not. There's not a lot of, especially back then, there's not much, wasn't much music industry or film industry. So I kind of figured I needed to go to Los Angeles if I wanted to follow this dream, which I didn't even really know what that meant at that point. I sort of thought, oh, you go to school and you get a degree and you get films. You go, I don't know. Which does happen, but it wasn't really it was my ignorance really was what it was. I didn't really know. So I went to college down in Southern California and just kind of ended up the school I went to had a lot of wonderful musicians that are still currently studio session musicians in Los Angeles. So I use them in my orchestras even now when I record there. And so it was a matter of kind of word of mouth. I would I don't know, do you know who Wayne Bergeron is? Trumpet player, amazing trumpet player, like Top Call,
Yeah.
LA, yeah, and jazz guy. So Wayne was one of my friends in that era. Well, he still is my friend, but so like Wayne would play my jazz band charts. And he would then know that somebody else needed an arranger, to do like for Knott's Berry Farm or for different arranging projects. So I'd get recommended on to projects in that regard when I was young. And then and that's the sort of growth thing. Then if I did a good job for that person, they would recommend me on to the next person that they would hear that needed some help. And so my career just kind of grew like that. It was very organic. I've never been a self-promoter, so I always sort of just waited for work to come in, and which I suppose if I could go back in a time machine, I might change that a little bit because it took a lot longer to get to places, I suppose, than it might have otherwise. But that being said, it was pretty much just word of mouth and always working as hard as I could and always trying to be a team player and polite and respectful and doing the best that I could always. And that seemed to work. It eventually led to further, opportunities down the road.
Yep, that's a recipe for success for sure.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
be dedicated and always do good work. And
Yeah.
that has led you to some tremendous success with the Wish movie by Disney. And I was thinking, because you've done a long career as an orchestrator, I know you because I'm primarily an orchestrator. I know you as an orchestrator, but I also appreciate you as a composer very highly. So I'm just thinking, and this is a question I'd like to ask. One of the audience questions from me being the audience now. So orchestration and arranging. What has orchestration taught you in terms of composition, and what has composing taught you into when you're orchestrating? I mean, like, how do they affect each other?
Yeah.
Because they are separate things, but they are in so many ways intertwined. Because in a way, maybe when you are orchestrating, you are basically composing the oboe part in a way. But then again,
Right.
you're not humming the tune. The tune, somebody hummed the tune, but you're still kind of composing, at least making music, even though you're orchestrating. So that's maybe my question, personal question this time.
Yeah. Well, I might even take a step back And for 20, well, I've always been a composer too, right? I always, even at that very early age, when in my teens, I was composing a lot of music. And then kind of my early, you know, 25 years or so of working on films, I was actually doing a fair amount of composing too. It was just as ghostwriting or additional music, whatever you want to say, right? So, but so I was composing as well as orchestrating throughout those periods. I wasn't ghostwriting on every project I worked on. So I don't want anybody to get the idea that I was, writing, you know, you know, all those films, but on a good chunk of them, probably about 30 of them I was. And so I got a lot of composing experience in working with film, kind of behind the scenes in a way. But you know, the way I work as a composer is I'm pretty old school in the regard of I get my themes together first. So the first thing I work on when I'm working on a film as a composer is I will just spend um, you know, as much time as it takes or as much time as you have getting my themes for the characters or the different, you know, scenarios or whatever together. And I will still write those out actually on just paper with pencil so that I have something to refer to. I don't drop them into, I find it takes me more time to put them into, even though I'm a pretty fast Sibelius user or, in Cubase, I found that it's easier for me just to have them written out on a sheet of paper and then I can just flip through easier down the road to remember what was that theme again, and so I treat my melodies as not necessarily in orchestrational um in an orchestrational vein. I'm thinking them as melodies. But then when I get into actually writing to picture and writing the scene, that's when I will then take those themes and put them on specific instruments. And so that's where kind of that interplay works for me. I mock up everything, of course. We all have to anymore. Almost all of us have to. And so I write in a sequencer as far as composing goes. But I'm always, I think I've orchestrated so much and I listened since such an early age to so many scores and studied them so in depth that there's sort of a lot of that's just a natural thing for me, at this point to where, I don't really fret too much about, how am I going to orchestrate this section? I kind of know, I've been down the road so many times. I kind of know, not that it's always great to be looking for new ways and new things. Of course, you want to be doing that, but I always kind of know what's going to kind of work and what probably is not going to work. And so the orchestration side of it is almost second nature to me at this point, if that makes sense.
It surely does make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can imagine, and all of us should, of course, study many scores so that it comes as, second nature. Music is our language in a way, but that's really interesting. And I can imagine just the amount of music you've orchestrated. It has to be like the hours. Have you ever counted how many bars? Because I remember us talking we had an email maybe a few years ago where I said something about maybe just following the work, how it processes, how many minutes per day or something like that. So I
Right.
always kind of keep a tally of how many
Yeah.
bars and how many minutes and all that stuff. But have you ever made some statistics of how much
I,
stuff you've
I
done?
haven't over my career, but it would be a little bit, I suppose. But I always do that though. I used to by hand write down like how many minutes of music I was composing a day and would work, manually work out like how much I had left and how much I had to average per day. And now there's like QDB as a software
Yeah.
that tracks all that. It's a great program. And so now I use that. But yeah, I'm very, it is an industry where time is certainly a big, a big part of it, and so you have to, make sure you're staying on track. But I always, I shoot for, like it's nice to get kind of like composing. It's like a minute and a half is what I feel like a day is a pretty good pace, and that's fully mocked up, and I don't, again, I mock up everything completely exact, like so you could look at my Cubase file and it's, the first violins are exactly what they're going to be on the score page, the violas and everything like that, and the French horns are broken out, and I always write, I don't do any section things at all. My woodwinds are all exactly how they're going to be on the score, and I actually did that. This is part of the class probably, but so I'm going to be spilling the beans, but this is a teaser of the
No,
class.
no, it's actually your, yeah. No, we're about to get to that. Yes, no, no, but I'm just listening. I'm just enchanted, or whatever the word is, because I'm amazed, because any orchestrator working on a project like that would just be saying thank you. And any
Yeah, yeah.
orchestrator listening to this, I think they're excited and smiling while they listen to this, because my God,
Yep.
the ensemble patches, they can be a lot sometimes.
Oh man, no kidding.
You have
And
trumpets like this. That's your
right.
trumpet patch, right?
Exactly. Oh, yeah, believe me, I know. I know exactly what you're saying. And and it's really, Rolf, it's really interesting because I write that way because I always have orchestrated until Wish. I orchestrated every second of every minute of every note that I had arranged or composed or whatever. So I started doing my mock-ups that way out of knowing that I would save myself time down the road when I was orchestrating, right? Because I didn't want to be sorting out all the ensemble stuff. It's pretty quick for me to do it with the way that I write, to be able to write the strings broken out, instead of using an ensemble patch. And so by writing it in the sequencer that way, I save myself countless hours when it comes time to orchestrating, because it's essentially just transcribing, plugging in my Cubase file over into Sibelius, and so it was really self protection is the reason I first started writing that way. And then I realized, though, that man, this is really the right way to write, the correct way to write, because you're really writing for the instruments properly, and you're not leaving it up to somebody else to make a decision. If it's not yourself, you're not leaving it up to somebody else to make those decisions that to me are very, integral to what the composition is, right? That it's that final orchestration is really a part of the composition. And but I've been through that whole thing, right, of orchestrating for other composers, of where you're getting, it would take three string orchestras alone just to cover the string parts, right? So a big part of that job as an orchestrator when you're in that role is minimizing, and trying to make it work with real players but and not have it just sound so thin because you have too many divisies going on or whatever. So sorry, you can get me going on this. I'll talk forever
No,
about
well, that was the whole point, man.
that.
That was the whole point. But I actually see. I think there's a magic there, because,
Yeah,
and I think that is what people will learn from this class as well, and that's what I'm very intrigued about, because it means if you can make a mock-up sound well, so that it translates kind of exactly into a score. That means you've done some magic with your mock-up and how you've set up everything, what libraries you use, and I think you don't tell everything now, because we want to tease the class,
right.
but that is kind of the magic, because I know people, myself included, write with ensemble patches just because I don't know how to make it sound good without the ensemble patches. So you have some
Right.
magic there.
Right. And I think, and I appreciate that. And you're spot on again, with that assessment. But I think that's a lot of where the score study really helped me, right? Because I knew what a violin, I knew what a Ravel violin part was going to look like, or, I knew, I knew going into it. So that makes it easier to conceptualize for me at this point, how to write, a violin one, violin two, viola, cello, bass, in a sequencer, because I've seen it so much. And so I just always encourage score study. If you're really interested in writing for the orchestra properly, that's the best way to learn, is look at what works, and then hopefully you'll steer clear of things that maybe don't work. And then obviously getting the oral feedback is really wonderful too, to have that, which is hard. It's a hard opportunity to get, but when you do have that opportunity, it's a really great way to learn. That's maybe even the best way to learn, is hear what you've done. And
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, and keep
yeah,
a notebook close, because to take notes. What doesn't work? Why is the oboe sticking out? And why is
yep,
the oboe not sticking out? And stuff like that.
exactly. And I still fall into those things, even at this point in my life. I get into a session sometimes and I'm going, wow, this isn't quite working the way that I was expecting it to. And so it's a lifelong journey, right? Which is another thing I love about it, is that you never
Yes.
can learn it all, and you
Oh,
never know it all.
absolutely.
And Yeah, and that's one of the big joys of it for me is that I'm still sorting things out and learning new things, new techniques. So yeah,
And trust me,
it's a great
that's
life.
very encouraging to me as well, because I'm always imagining all of you know, who've been doing this for a few years more than I. I think you always got it figured out, and you know, I'm here banging my head against the wall, not knowing what to do with the second clarinet or whatever, and then I hear something like this. So it's encouraging to hear, in a way, because you never can know it all, and that's okay,
That's
but you still have
right.
to get it done. I think because you know
Right.
sometimes. And that maybe might be another a point of discussion is perfectionism, which is you know something
Right.
that a lot of people who do this struggle with because you just want
Absolutely.
it to be perfect. You don't want to have any embarrassing mistakes anywhere.
Yep.
So
Yep.
so I don't, and but still you need to get it done. So I don't know how you kind
Right.
of deal with that pressure. I think good routines and as you said, score study for all of your life kind of helps, I suppose. But there,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
bet there's always some. There's still that the pressure of the thing, you know, getting it
Yeah.
done.
You know what I think though, I'll just say I think I struggled with that in my youth up until my mid-20s probably. And then it was like I started realizing, well, you never know how long your career is going to go, right? But there's a chance I'll get to do this again, and so it helped me to realize that it doesn't have to be 100% perfect because it's nothing is 100% perfect, right? First off. And so I realized that. But you always should be striving to make it as great as it can be or as good as it can be. And so I kind of learned that you had to sort of be able to pace yourself and realize when you have to kind of let it go. And when you're sort of figuring this out, that's harder to do. But then as the years go by, you realize, okay, this is pretty good and it does what it needs to do. And yes, I wish I had another hour to work on, I don't know, the inner voicings or something like that, or making sure my woodwind, layout is really what I really ultimately could be or something. But there's a point you just have to kind of let go. But then I always keep track of that and then remember that for the next project of what it was that I wish I would have had more time to do. And then I will think about it before the next project. Like it's almost the best time is between projects, because that's when you can assess where you were and what you needed to improve on for the next project. And I do that all the time I still do it with my shortcuts and stuff like that, because I still realize I'm still learning, oh man, I wish I would have a quicker way to do that. And so then when you have a little bit of downtime, I figure it out and I'll program it into my shortcuts. And then the next project, I'm that much faster, or that much more efficient. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling all over
No,
the
no,
place
no.
here.
That was actually one of the things I wanted to address because I actually think about you when I have downtime between projects because I know that's what you do. You spend that time working on your template or your shortcuts or, you know, some technical issue,
Yep.
either musical or then technical,
Yep.
technology wise. And I do that too, and I try to do that. You know, keep track of what's not working, what can be more efficient, because it's really hard to do that once you're you know up
Oh,
against it, up against the
you
deadline.
can't. You
Yeah,
really
you
can't.
just can't. But you got to take
No,
a mental note at least, and then.
exactly.
But so I
Exactly.
wanted to ask you about because I know you are kind of a workflow master. You've also been on the Mac Power Users podcast, you know, talking about all this stuff. And I think we will be talking about these topics at the class in Austria too. But I'm
Mhm.
wanted to ask you about the transition to the digital age because you've written a lot of music on pen and paper, right? But
Right.
then you
Exactly.
really because I know you are tremendously good with your workflow and rigorous about it. So how did you manage that transition back? You know, was that in kind of 90s, 2000? When did that happen? You know, the digital age, Finale, Sibelius, all that. How did you come on top of that? I guess
Yeah.
that's the word.
Well, I actually was a really early adopter. I got my first computer I think I get confused. I think it was 1983. And it was an Atari ST 1040, which didn't even have a hard drive, and it had 1 meg of RAM, not 1 gig, but 1 meg of RAM. So, so I started off right at the beginning, when music technology started taking off in a kind of a commercial way. It had always obviously been at, like at Stanford, in more of an academic setting back in the 70s, even probably back into the 60s. But in the early 80s was when I first started. I got my first Mac in like 1984, 85, probably 85. And so I always, even though I did everything by hand, and I grew up doing everything by hand, and all that music I'd written in my teens, that was in the 70s. So that was all by hand. And so I had already written a ton of stuff by hand, by the time that technology started. But I was always really interested in it. And I sort of saw the power, the potential power, and both in sequencing, because I thought, wow, holy cow, if you can, recreate an orchestra in a computer, not thinking of it as replacing live musicians, but essentially thinking of where the world has ended up, that for demos and stuff, that would be a great kind of tool to be able to work things out, and then also notationally. So I got Finale. It wasn't 1.00, but it was like 1.1 something. So again, really right off the bat in the mid 80s, I guess must have been 87, maybe. I can't remember. But so I started off right off the bat, and always was interested in it. So I live in Oregon again. I lived in LA for 12 years for college, and then through my 20s. And then when I was 32, I moved back to Oregon. So that's 30 something years ago now. But when I moved back to Oregon, I thought I was going to be out of the music business because my wife wanted to come back. She's from Oregon too, and we had a son. Our first son was born, so we came back. I still wanted to keep in the music business, but I didn't know how it was going to happen. But it was shortly before moving, I got hired to be an arranger on The Tonight Show, which was when Jay Leno had just taken over the show. So this is 1992. And at that point, I moved to Oregon, and I did like a bunch, 200 and something arrangements, compositions for the show from Oregon. But it was all in Finale. And so in the early 90s, and knowing me, right, I wanted to maximize my workflow. So I was kind of an early, you might say, power user of Finale. Not, I mean, that wasn't that early. It was already around for 5 or 6 years, but I really got my Finale act together in those early 90s. And but then when I started doing film in the mid 90s, was really, or late 90s, I still was doing everything by hand, because I didn't feel like at that point computers were strong enough to really work quickly or faster than just doing it by hand. So all of my orchestrations for Tarzan and Brother Bear and geez, I don't even remember, a whole bunch of films were all done by hand. And uh, but then finally, I think it was about, must have been 2005 or six, was when I felt like, okay, computers are strong enough now. And I also kind of realized, okay, everybody is going to, computer notation at that point. So that's when I started first doing film scores in Finale. And I believe How to Train Your Dragon, I was in Finale still at that point. And then I switched over. I had a wonderful friend and colleague, John Ashton Thomas, who passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a fantastic orchestrator and a great man and a great friend. But he was a Sibelius user, and he then kind of kept sort of saying, "Hey, why don't you should check out Sibelius," and so I finally did on one break. I had about a month off, and immediately loved it. So that's when I switched to Sibelius. But so from that point on, then 2006, I suppose everything has been in a notation software. So for me, it was really kind of a natural thing. I never wanted to, though, have the notation stuff take longer than if I would have done it by hand. And that was my really kind of final determination of switching over to technology. But I love technology. I mean, but I also love doing things by hand too. Yeah.
Great. And I think being in the music business, especially if you're an orchestrator arranger, you kind of have to master both in a way nowadays, if we're
Yeah.
looking at the future and the present moment, I think.
Oh yeah. Honestly, yeah, it's all, I mean, really, it is just technology at this point. And
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. And I was thinking, so do you have any Anything technology-wise that you're looking forward to in the future, like let's say AI or something exciting or a gadget you're hearing about, or even Dorico, who knows? Is there
Right.
something that excites you about technology at the moment, and especially what doesn't necessarily we don't necessarily have it right now, but we will have it in the near future? Is there something
Yeah,
special?
I got to say, you mentioned I'm hugely interested in Dorico. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential there. And I'm talking about potential as far as right now. My biggest drag in work is that I have to use Cubase to mock up my demos, and then I have to notate in Sibelius. But what my fingers crossed, what I really hope is that Dorico will be that holy grail that I've looked for. I'm telling you, Ralph, my whole career, going back to the night my first computer, was to be able to do everything in one box, in one piece of software. And I'm really hoping that Dorico will, if not be that software, be the bridge to Cubase that will enable me to do that. So that's why I'm spending a lot of my, off time. If I have any off time now, I'm sort of like just pouring through the Dorico manual and like kind of like, checking it out and seeing if that'll, where it's at.
Yeah,
But that team it's a great team, and I am very hopeful that they'll be able to crack that nut. And I don't know when, but that's what I'm most excited about at this point and looking forward to.
me too, to be honest. I'm a Dorico user primarily, Sibelius of
Oh,
course too. But
cool.
they're working very hard and they're
Yeah,
trying to make it better every day. And a lot of people are encouraging them to make it better. I can see the forums on Facebook, for instance. There's a
right.
heated debate, which is a good, I guess.
Yeah, 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 for sure. No, if anybody can do it, I think it'll be them
Yeah,
at this point. And again, they have the huge advantage of being able to write code, fresh from,
yeah,
whatever. I guess they started in maybe 2000 and what, 14 or something, I think. But it's like it's new code. They've got obviously the tie-in with to Cubase through Steinberg. They got the support of Steinberg. So, if anybody is capable of doing it, it's a huge task, right? I mean, it's just giant. I can't even
yes,
imagine trying to tackle something like that. So,
very
but
complicated.
I'm very hopeful, and I'm going to be talking to you about Dorico then.
Yeah,
That's going to
no,
be that's going to be my questions to you will be
yes, we can talk about that in Baden, and other people are also welcome to talk about
right,
Dorico in Baden. So yes,
right, of
I'd be
course.
happy to answer any questions. And
Fantastic.
so that is getting us closer to our final question, which has to do with Baden, your course there, July 13 until July 16 for 4 days. So, what can people expect, and what should they perhaps, what kind of mentality and questions and gear should they perhaps bring to the class? What can we tell your students about the class?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm really excited to be there. I'm and also to be. I've never really done anything like this where it's been a 4 day session with folks. It's usually just been like a day or a afternoon or something when I've done similar things before. So I'm really looking forward to having a chance to work closely with people, with the folks in a very intimate setting, and being able to just be talking, like this. But I'm really looking forward to, I think one thing I can really offer that is pretty unique is my approach to writing and working within a sequencer. And I think I think it's probably a fairly unique and very streamlined approach to that. And so I'm hoping that that's something I can pass on. That people will get some new knowledge and experience, and I'm also looking forward to being a dialogue too, right? I don't want it just to be this is the only way, because as we've talked about earlier, there really is no perfect, there's no only one way to do things. So I'm also actually looking forward to getting feedback or hearing other ideas from the other students, from the students there. And I'm hoping that we'll have some kind of a lovely interaction in a group of people that just enjoy being together and can bounce ideas off of each other, and where we all learn together. So I think that it's the streamlining technology. I also think I have insights to offer that aren't commonly accessible with how I approach orchestration, and I think that I've done it so much that that I can really and it's not just that translation of orchestration, but I'm talking about organic orchestration, where you're conceptualizing the orchestration instead of just translating somebody else's ideas, if that makes sense. And that's something I very much look forward to talking about. I think it's obvious that's something that's dear to my heart, and and I think also uh, uh, I'm looking forward to there's going to be some score study where I'm going to be showing some examples of scores that I've done and sharing those with the students and then open for discussion and questions on why did I choose to do this or do that, and that'll also apply not just to orchestration, but to the composition side of it too, particularly regarding Wish. I'd love to talk about that. If any of the students have a chance to see Wish, or listen to the soundtrack and my score cue, that would probably be a really appreciated thing from my point of view, and then be able to come in with questions and have a knowledge and understanding. Or Once Upon a Studio also, it's a really fun short, and people that was a lot of fun, and there's a lot of things we can talk about buried in that score as well. So those are the things I'm really incredibly looking forward to talking about and having a dialogue with the students.
That sounds wonderful. And I'd enroll twice if I could, but I'll be there in the back of the class. But that sounds absolutely fantastic. And I wish for people to understand what a privilege it is to have Dave Metzger be a part of the Hollywood Music Workshop. And we are very thrilled and honored that you're going to be there. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. And I think with this, we can tell the students that if you haven't yet enrolled, please do. If you're planning to do that, if you're watching this before April 15, there's an early bird sign up. So please check out the hollywoodmusicworkshop.com to learn more about this class and how you can study with Dave. Dave, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I just say, thank you very much for having me here today, and I'm really looking forward to meeting together in July.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. This has been the Hollywood Music Workshop podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, Dave. Thanks for your time, and looking forward to seeing you in Baden in July.